Hello and welcome to the weekly review. My name is Roger Alfred Yoron Modi. I'm the producer and host of the show, which is a program of South Network. Today I'm joined by Jame Kolok, the Executive Director for Foundation for Democracy and Accountable Governance. And we shall be discussing the issue of the national budget, which was tabled last week before the Council of Ministers. And also we'll look into the implementation of the Revitalized Peace Agreement. Welcome to the show, Jame Kolok.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
The Minister of Finance and Planning, Athian Dean, presented to the Council of Ministers over 218 billion South Sudanese pounds as the budget for financial year 2020-2021. And there have been people complaining. I've seen online and in several avenues, people have been complaining about the fact that the structure of government at the moment is not fully constituted as per the Revitalized Peace Agreement. You don't have the National Legislature reconstituted as the agreement has required, and also at the lower levels of government, the states are not fully structured. So people are asking, what is happening? How comes the government can come up with a budget when the structures of the government at the lower levels are not constituted? How did they come up with that budget even for the government as a whole? So what is your response as a civil society activist?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I would like to thank you guys for this opportunity for me to be able to engage in this debate, and indeed, which is a very, very important discussion. I think for purposes of everybody, we need to underscore that the government was initially to be fully formed by 22nd of February. That was the date in which the formation of the government should have taken place based on the peace agreement and based on the extensions that were done severally in the past. Now, today, we are literally talking about 8 months almost since 22nd of February. And within this 8 months, we are yet to have a fully formed government. Of course, the government that has been formed, literally being said to have been formed, is in reference to the executive and the partial appointment of the governors. Now, for everybody, including young people, the understanding is that for something to be called a government, it actually needs to have its own 3 organs. We know that the organs are the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. Now, for our case, we seem to have the 2 arms of government, but we are missing a very, very important arm of government, which is the legislature. So now, when we are now talking about a budget, the same dilemma also comes actually to not only the citizens, but the civil society, because the constitution is very clear in regards to the role and functions of the parliament. And when you look at the constitution, it clearly stipulates that one of the role of the parliament is to pass the national budget. But in this case, we don't have the parliament. It means even if we have the budget formulated, which is of course the responsibility of the executive, that budget will not become a sanctioned budget, and therefore it will not be able to proceed ahead without the approval of the parliament. So this is the challenge that we actually have as a country, and we are not so certain whether genuinely this government is able to operate without a budget that is approved by the constituted parliament.
So with regards to the procedures that they are trying to follow at the moment, if they go on with the budget to the current legislature, what would be the impact? And from what you have said already, and other people already expressed the need to reconstitute the parliament, the legislature as per the agreement. Even the interim chair of the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, the body monitoring the agreement, also called for reconstitution of the legislature as per the agreement in their meeting yesterday. So what are we foreseeing here?
First of all, we have got to make sure that anything that is done must be in conformity with the peace agreement, and it must be in conformity with our law, and in this case, our constitution. Now, both documents provides very clear framework in terms of who is supposed to do that particular role. And for the case of the Revitalized Agreement, it states very clear that the parliament is supposed to be reconstituted. Of course, reconstituted to about 550 as per the provided formulas. That means there is a meaning in reconstituting the parliament, and there is a meaning in apportioning, for example, the total number of MPs that come from the various parties to the agreement. And if the parliament is reconstituted, then that means we have got legitimacy. That means anything that is then done by the reconstituted parliament would have been in conformity with the Revitalized Agreement. Now, if the formulated budget that was presented to the Council of Ministers happen to go to the current parliament, there are a lot of questions that will come. First, the parliament literally, as per the agreement, is not legitimate, because we are only talking of parliament that was reconstituted under the 2015 peace agreement. So when you look at this agreement overrides other previous agreements, literally mean that the parliament does not exist. And therefore, it is illegitimate if this budget is passed through the current parliament. Why? It is illegitimate even from the sense that the total number of MPs that would have been debating this budget, the total number of contributions that would have been made would not be in existence. And therefore would only have literally MPs that were belonging to probably the government under the 2015 peace agreement, or to the parties that were affiliated to the government. So in this case, we are going to have one-sided assembly that will pass a budget under circumstances of actually not having the power to be able to pass that. So in any normal country, if we go into this kind of scenario, it will be challenged in the courts of law. And genuinely, I think there is a case here for anybody to comfortably go to court of law and win the case.
Talking about conformity with the agreement, you see, there were reports that, for example, the agreement was incorporated into the transitional constitution as required. Then there came complaints that no, there were alterations. Some provisions were not duly and correctly incorporated. Then there was a resolution from the IGAT meetings that those alterations be ratified. And here we have what we call the NCAC, the National Constitutional Amendment Committee, which was formed per the Revitalized Agreement. They are making laws and there is no transparency. Even the public, for example, yourself, I don't know if you have the copies of those amendment acts, but how do you ensure as members of the civil society and as the public, how do you work out to make sure that there is this conformity with the agreement when laws are being hidden from people and we don't even see the correct whether the wordings or whether the incorporations and the changes or the reviews and all these are done in conformity with the agreement?
Yeah, first of all, I will acknowledge the fact that a lot of the processes have happened without proper public engagement. However, for the case of the amendment process, the civil society have actually gotten some representation in the National Constitutional Amendment Committee. Now, our representatives have quite often given us considerable feedback in terms of the processes that are happening. Of course, we are not saying that the two individuals that represent us at the National Constitutional Amendment Committee are sufficient enough to mean that the public is actually aware of what is happening. Of course, it is important that up to now, questions are being asked, and it is the responsibility of the committee, and in this case, the parties to the peace agreement, to ensure that the argument or whatever representation they put in place in form of incorporating the agreement into the constitution must have been sanctioned by not only their supporters, but also the citizens. And therefore, up to now, many people do not actually understand what is happening. The reality is that a lot of work has been done in terms of the incorporation and in terms of the amendment that is required, but there are also some literal contradiction that actually happened, and that is a little bit trying to derail the process. But one thing which is clear is that other than some of the manipulations that are being put forward in terms of wrongly amending certain provision, the agreement is very clear. If there are contradictions that are happening between the agreement and whatever law, the agreement overrides. So in this case, we believe that the strength of the agreement is very strong. And that is why when we are arguing and say that the parliament, the current one, is illegitimate, we are absolutely right, because that is exactly what the agreement is saying. So there is no worry about that. There is nobody who can challenge us on that. People just have to acknowledge the fact that we have to insist that the provision of the agreement that all the parties signed for must be respected.
So in other words, you're saying you also don't have copies of the Amendment Act as many of the public, or you have?
We do have the copies of the amendment, but we did not get necessarily through a process that easily gives people that particular information. But where there are issues, our representative in the NCRC are able to actually provide those kind of copies of the amendment process that is happening. So yes, we are able to access it. However, not everybody else is able to access it.
And regarding the recent reports of clashes, you know, this is something that a lot of people have expressed concern about. Clashes despite ceasefire agreement in place. In fact, the Revitalized Agreement also provides for permanent ceasefire and transitional security arrangements. So, what do you say about this issue of defection, and which, as also has been argued many times, contradict the agreement, especially the issue of ceasing hostilities and all this? You find one party moves from their party to another party, and then clashes happen. As civil society, what do you say about that?
First of all, we have to be very clear in some of these provisions. I think by now, the parties would have been comfortably moving towards ensuring that the security arrangement is fully implemented. And one of the provisions within the security arrangement talks about the process of the unification of the forces. And as we know, so far, the process must have gone through training these individuals that were formally cantoned and therefore scrutinized to go to the training sites. Now, in this case, the training would have resulted into graduation of these forces to become a unified force, and therefore that becomes the national army which is the South Sudan People's Defense Forces. Right now, we continue to see some kind of defections, which the civil society are actually condemning because it is not in the spirit of the peace agreement. By default, whether we like it or not, by default, every soldier, regardless of his or her affiliations to these parties, is literally SSPDF by virtue of the agreement. The path towards nationalizing that particular soldier purely is sanctioned by the peace agreement. And therefore, if you are telling me that you are defecting, for example, from another party to SSPDF, is literally like you are saying you are defecting from the SSPDF to SSPDF as per the provision of the peace agreement. The other challenge that we tend to see other particular parties encouraging this kind of defections to an extent that when a general, for example, defects, everybody celebrates. Soldiers are not politicians. These generals are not politicians. If these defections was a political defection, where somebody, for example, is defecting from one party to the other, it will not be a bad idea to celebrate. In fact, you can celebrate because you have fished out a politician from another party. But soldiers or the army is supposed to exercise high level of neutrality. Now, if you courageously defect and you say you are defecting from this party to another, when we very much know that the party that you are defecting from is actually part of the government, then we don't understand what you are talking about. So these are things that the civil society have been saying. It is in bad spirit. It is not in conformity with the agreement. It is a violation of the agreement. It is causing tensions. Like you have been following, there are tensions in Kajukeji. They are fighting, there's been fighting in Kajukeji. Attack of a particular area or a particular jurisdiction that is a training site for one of the parties. So this kind of confusion, I think, is dangerous for the peace agreement. And therefore, we are saying that it tantamount to violation of the cessation of hostility agreement, tantamount to cessation, tantamount to broader violation of the peace agreement, and also tantamount to recruitment. Because when you allow a general with his forces, like the recent one who said he has over 1,000, almost close to 2,000 forces coming in the name of defection, then you are adding your number. That tantamounts to recruitment, which is a violation of the agreement as far as the cessation of hostility agreement is concerned.
And as we go to conclusion, there have been also reports between reports of clash between the SSPDF and other forces that are out of the agreement, like the National Salvation Front under General Thomas Shirilo. So, with regards to those clashes, also there is cessation of hostilities agreement of 2017, which their parties recommitted themselves to honoring through the Rome resolution, which was signed in February. So, what are you saying about those clashes as the reports of those clashes as a civil society, given that for long now many civil society activists have been silent on some of those issues?
Yeah, first of all, the group affiliated to the National Salvation Front were part of the cessation of hostility agreement of 2017. So the argument, for example, that we are not party to the Revitalized Agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan does not hold water. This is because the cessation of hostility provides very clear directives in terms of actions of those who have signed it to be able to adhere to the peace agreement. Now, these clashes that we have seen, especially at the beginning of this year, that has resulted into even displacement of citizens around Greater Yei is actually very frustrating and should not be encouraged. However, we still believe that no any other amount of violence can be able to bring genuine stability. Even the 21 years or so of the liberation struggle ended up with the politicians going to a negotiating table. So which means if we continue to still fight among ourselves, will not generate any tangible outcome other than displacing civilians, other than creating an environment of violations of human rights. Now, we are grateful to the process of Senegidio, which we feel is in line with the spirit of the settlement into whatever is going on between all these warring parties. And we encourage the National Salvation Front to commit to this process. We also encourage the government and the rest of the parties to be able to ensure that they embrace this process and that they're able to have a genuine conversation on how they should be able to join the broader peace agreement. We cannot afford this kind of mayhem because it's dangerous for our country.
Talking about the process through the community of St. Egidio, the civil society, you guys seem to have been silent about monitoring that those agreements that they signed, like the Rome Resolution in February 2020, including on the fact that those parties, like South Sudan Opposition Movement Alliance, were supposed to be represented in some bodies like the CITISAM, the ceasefire monitors, the ceasefire monitoring body. You know, joint monitoring throughout the history of wars in South Sudan have been the mechanism put in place through experience to make sure that people jointly monitor that ceasefire agreement is respected. Because if you have the monitoring being done by others, you are not there, people can write reports against you, and even if they are not verifiable and stuff like that. So, as civil society, what is your take on those issues? Given that you've been silent actually on following up. Yeah.
The civil society has not really been silent. I think the civil society has been up on arm, especially on exposing some of the violations that have been happening as the consequences of these clashes between the various groups, whether it is SSPDF, the IO, or the National Salvation Front. We have also been very, very vocal in terms of ensuring that all these parties actually adhere to the cessation of hostility agreement and to the other subsequent documents that were signed under the process of St. Egidio. Now, in terms of monitoring this process, of course, we have got to acknowledge that practically speaking, is definitely not going to be literally possible for those guys who were seen as emissaries or people that are antagonists of the status quo to be able to have the necessary environment to really continuously monitor this process. But our focus as civil society is to ensure that citizen actually does its work. I think of reason we have not seen continuous reports that are coming out in regards to the verification mechanism or monitoring mechanism of citizens. There are a lot of incidences that have been happening. We have not seen them come out very vocal. And now our recommendation is that they need to get very serious to be able to get on the ground and, for example, understand what has happened in Kajukeji in the last few days as the consequences of the defection that has happened. Yesterday, the civil society wrote a petition to the co-chairs of the Joint Defense Board, in which we express our concern over the resurgence of violence that has come as a result of the defection that has happened. we have urged them to be able to ensure that they stop that conflict and to be able to ensure that they undertake actions that promotes other than derail the peace process. Our representative was yesterday in one of the meetings, and I think all these are things that the civil society have been doing and ensuring that the parties really adhere to the peace agreement, including those that may not have been part of the peace agreement. They should be able to adhere to the cessation of the hostility agreement that they signed.
Well, as we conclude, I would like to let you tell our public, our audience, how do you operate? Because the civil society in South Sudan, they have divided themselves into groups. Some are silent, some talk after a while. Seems things are not going straightforward. Maybe you tell our audience challenges you're expressing, or how is it? How comes that sometimes totally there is silence on many issues that are of importance to the public?
First of all, we have to acknowledge that it's not easy to operate in an environment of conflict. We just have to acknowledge that South Sudan is a very complex environment. But this is not to say that there is no courage in the civil society to be able to speak out on issues of national importance. I think one of the biggest problems in this country is that there are certain individuals within the system that look at the civil society as antagonists, that look at the civil society as another version of political party. They don't recognize the civil society as a formidable partner that is able to move this process forward. But because of this, you find that there are some scenarios where the civil society fall in trouble. Of course, we have known and followed that some of our colleagues ended up actually in jail because of their courage to speak out on issues. Some of us continue to speak because we know what we say is not necessarily intended to antagonize anybody, but is intended to contribute towards the genuine implementation of the peace agreement. Obviously, there are people that speak, and there are many of them, and there are also many that do not speak. Why are they not speaking? They have to exercise high level of self-censorship. In this case, you will have to ensure that you polish your language before you say anything, because probably the consequences may not be the right one. However, at some point, because of constructive engagement that we have, even with the senior government officials, including people in the security agencies, they have started seeing us from a positive perspective. By the way, we even have generals in the security circles who sometimes reach out to the civil society on issues of national importance for us to be able to speak. There are politicians that reach out to the civil society to be able to speak on their behalf. Remember, not all of them can be able to speak openly because of, for example, party discipline or because of regulations that have been given in the security circles. So to us, we consider this as a positive move. We are already having some friends even within the system that really see the civil society as a formidable partner in ensuring that we move this country towards the genuine stability that the South Sudanese people are looking for.
And finally, how do you think the public could also get to understand you well as civil society, and perhaps also do their part to move forward the work you guys are doing and also be part of it?
I think we have had our advocacy trickle down to the grassroots. I think of recent, if you even follow in the social media, you would notice that South Sudanese are becoming very vocal on number of things that are happening in this country. Not only on the implementation of the peace agreement, but also on issues of corruption. I think you have noted that of recent, the debate on corruption has been on the top. of the social media, and especially after the dismissal of the senior government officials, including the Minister of Finance and an official from NILPEC and the National Revenue Authority. This has been a debate that has happened across the country, and it is happening because of the fact that the civil society have been vocal and the citizens have also been informed of the processes, and therefore they are able to speak out. Now, this is a very good sign. The civil society still have a long way, though, because for you to be able to effectively participate, you should be able to have information. Now, our responsibility is to ensure that the citizens are given adequate information as possible, whether it is on issue of the peace agreement, security issues, issues of constitutional making processes, issues of corruption, issues of whatever is going on, clashes, human rights violations. We have to make sure that the citizens are well informed. And that is the responsibility of the civil society. We are happy that we are not only working alone, but there are also vocal people, including those that have not even gone to schools. There are chiefs, there are ordinary women in the houses that have started speaking out. And I think this is how our country can be able to move towards the path that we need and towards a country that we so wish as South Sudanese.
Jame, David Kolok, thank you very much for being on the show. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to participate in this discussion.